This is Kevin Pruitt with another episode of Rising Tide Startups, and my guest today is Meryl Johnston. Meryl, thank you for joining us on Rising Tide.
Hey, Kevin, it's great to be here.
So I am really looking forward to kind of hearing your backstory. We chatted a little bit before we hit the record button, but share a little bit with our audience. Who is Meryl Johnston?
So I'm originally an accountant, but before that, I always wanted to run businesses. So at heart, I think that I'm more of an entrepreneur than an accountant. And I was the kid that at school loved, my parents would have a garage sale and I'd love trying to do deals and sell things. But I actually spent 10 years in corporate accounting before I then made that transition back to running my own business. So I spent a little bit of time working at BDO, which is an international accounting firm, in audit, and also worked in corporate accounting roles at some big companies in Queensland, which is where I live in Australia.
So you kind of skipped over the whole earlier life wanting to be Yvonne Goolagong or Rod Laver. Did you kind of miss that one just a little bit? You want to touch on that? Because I actually had listened to that on another podcast, and I said I'd listened to a couple of interviews you had done, and I'm really curious about this whole idea that tennis kind of played in that a little bit.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I don't play tennis anymore, and now my life revolves around surfing. But in my early days, in fact, from when I was about 8 to 22 years old, my life was all about tennis. And I started, my grandmother was actually a top tennis player. And through the years, I spent a lot of time training, and actually at one point wanted to become a professional tennis player and played some professional tournaments. I took a gap year between finishing high school and university, and that was where I played those tournaments. So a lot of my life, my school life, was spent at tennis courts, training, and it was really great discipline, actually.
Sure.
For running a business. It's a sport that requires a lot of mental toughness. They talk about the game being mental, not just physical. And yes, I did the physical training, and my physique is different to that of a lot of other tennis players. I'm only 5'3", so I'm little. And I'm also quite petite. I think I weighed about 53 kilograms back when I was playing. So I did not have the physique. So for me, it was all that grit and determination and doing the best that I could, playing against these much larger players. And I think that really set me up for business, where you need a lot of grit and determination as well.
Well, that's really interesting. I love the whole idea that, just kind of life phases that you've kind of gone through that. And even, we've talked about this many, many times on the show about, nothing in your past is wasted. And I'm sure like you just mentioned, you're bringing some of these to the table even today. So take us through kind of that transition, maybe the whole idea that said you woke up one day and said, hey, I need to go out on my own because I'm really not a very good employee.
Oh, it was funny. My thinking behind that was that I'd left my role at BDO in Melbourne, and I worked really quite long hours there. It was an interesting job, and I really felt like I was progressing my career being around other great accountants. But I decided to leave there and move to the Gold Coast for the lifestyle, for the warm weather and surfing. But then I ended up working for another big company in a corporate role, and I was I had 2 promotions in the space of 2 years. So I was quickly moving up the ladder. And there I was, working nights, working weekends again. And after a couple of years of that, I reflected and thought, hang on, I moved here for the lifestyle. I'm just following the same patterns that I was following in Melbourne. Is this really what I want? And so I left that job with nothing to go to and went traveling for a couple of months. And when I came back, I wasn't really sure what I would do. I'd always known that I wanted to run a business, but even then I didn't know whether it was the right time to start a business. But I didn't have any work. So I thought, well, I'd give it a go. And I also, through a recruitment company, registered as an accounting contractor. And so that provided a little bit of income.
Sure.
And I just registered a business name, got a logo, and had a go at doing a consulting business. And I hadn't really thought through or done a lot of planning. I hear other people leave their corporate jobs and they've spent a couple of years planning what that business would look like. No, that wasn't me. I just was ready for a change. I left my job with nothing. And when I came back from overseas, thought, all right, let's just see what happens. I'd saved up a year of runway. So I wasn't under financial pressure to earn money tomorrow, which I think really helped.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. And it seems like I remember that you actually, did you have a business partner when you started, or did you just start this on your own?
Well, so that was my next business. So I went from the consulting business, MCJ Consulting, which was how I transitioned from corporate to working for myself. And then running that business, I realized the challenges in scaling. So once I got into it, then I realized I love business. But I'd forgotten that I really enjoyed this. And so got really involved in the business community. I went to, there's events called Startup Weekends, which I think run all around the world. So I've been to one of those events. And then it kind of triggered my thinking about, actually, I want to run something that's got global potential and the ability to scale. And my consulting business does not have that potential. And so it was there that I met in an online community a guy called Ben, who turned out to be my co-founder for my next business, which was Big Ninjas. So the transition from corporate was the consulting business, and then the transition from that was into more of a scalable startup, which is what I run today.
So confession time here. I mean, I was an accounting major in university for about 15 minutes. That's about how long it took me to decide that I hated the whole idea of looking at numbers and spreadsheets and ledgers all day long and debiting my credits and vice versa. But I gotta confess to you, I looked at the name of your business over and over and over again, thinking, what does this have to do with coffee? And then I thought, it's not coffee, you silly old man. It's the kind of the old derogatory adage of accountants, they're bean counters. That's
Absolutely.
exactly where it had to come from that. So tell us the little genesis of the name. There it is right there. So how did you come up with the name?
It's funny, I didn't even like the name when we first started, and now I get all kinds of, well, it's a conversation starter. Some people love it, some people don't, but people remember it. And when we were picking the name, we were following a process from a book called The 7-Day Startup. And there's a number of steps to starting a business in 7 days, including choosing a business name, creating a logo, building a website, and coming up with your pricing packages and trying to get a customer in your first 7 days. And with that methodology, you can't spend months trying to pick a business name. Right. You just have to get started and try and find customers. So we knew that we wanted a .com website because we wanted to be a global business. Yep. And then we knew that it would be hard to find something like a 5-letter domain name. So we literally just ran all different kinds of combinations and searched what .coms were available, and then what kind of sounded not a traditional accounting firm, but maybe related to the accounting industry. So we looked at all combinations of being something, as well as many other words. And that was the one my business partner liked the best. And I wasn't sold on it, but we had to make a decision and move on. And I figured if it turned out, if we actually got customers and it turned into something, we could always change the name later if we wanted to. And then it stuck and it grew on me. And now I love it.
Isn't that the way it happens sometimes? So let me ask you this is kind of a crazy question, but has it ever been a detriment in dealing with companies that you wanted to onboard?
So I think it could be. If we were trying to work with a corporate business and do their bookkeeping, they might not want to work with a business called Big Ninjas. But we have an ideal customer, and traditional businesses who have more of a corporate mindset are not our ideal client. So I think it repels people that aren't our ideal client, but it attracts the modern tech-savvy business that we want to work with.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think of all these different companies that have started up that have these kind of unique, quirky names that, that it just fits their whole vision, and it fits who they are as a company, it fits their brand identity type things. So, you kind of play off of that wordplay a little bit, but that's a perfect segue into the kind of the next section that I wanted to ask you about. And that really is, you talked about, identifying who your ideal client is. And if you have identified that, let's say I look like your ideal client here, and you and I are stepping on a lift to go up, 10 stories here. Give me your elevator pitch for the next, 30 seconds to a minute.
I usually adapt it to who I'm talking to. So our tagline is Big Ninjas, so our mission is to provide stress-free business finances to create freedom for entrepreneurs. And we provide bookkeeping, financial reporting, and education services. So that's what we do. But then I would really adapt that to, well, who am I talking to? Is this someone that's just starting a business? Then I'd probably talk more about our education products and how we teach people to do bookkeeping, or business owners on how to understand their numbers. Whereas if it was a much more established business, I'd probably be talking about forecasting and the importance of building a finance team. So I've got kind of the framework of, well, this is what we do, this is our core message and why we do it, but I really adapt it every time depending on who I'm talking to and what I think is relevant.
Sure, I mean, that makes perfect sense. But does a brand or a solo startup, or does an individual as a coach, so to speak, do they have to get to a certain level before they would need your services, or are you talking about maybe from day one?
I think it's important to have an accounting system in place from day one, but it might not make sense to outsource the bookkeeping from day one.
Mm-hmm.
We usually say businesses that are turning over between 100,000 and 200,000. That's kind of the entry point into our done for you recurring bookkeeping service. But we identified that it can take a couple of years to get to that point. So what can we offer prior to that stage? And that's where we have a Xero setup product. So we'll work with someone who's just starting the business to get the accounting software set up correctly. And then we have a training product to say, all right, well, we've set up everything the right way and optimize that. Now here's some training on how to do it yourself until you're ready to start looking at outsourcing tasks like bookkeeping.
Oh, what a great way to kind of onboard. It's something like a progressive onboarding, where if you're providing the kind of the nurturing process with them early, and then when they're ready to go full scale, you're right there. You kind of walk them through and wean them off the doing it themselves, so to speak. So you got to be a little more specific, because I know you work in many different areas. You talking Aussie dollars, Hong Kong dollars, Canadian dollars, American dollars. So
there I'm talking in US dollars. I figured that's kind of generally what a lot of our audience would associate with. We do work with clients in a lot of countries. We charge in US dollars for all of our clients apart from Australian clients, and we charge Australian dollars to them. But in terms of the revenue numbers, I said, yeah, that's based on US dollars.
Right. So we lived in the UK for like 9 years, and the nonprofit that I work for, I mean, we work with a chartered accountant every year doing audits and looking at our book of accounts and our reports and stuff like that. The accounting system in the UK is vastly different than the accounting system in the US. How do you kind of bridge that gap if you have, clients in both places? Do you actually hire people that are US based accountants? I know you have people that are working for you remotely as well. So how do you kind of, in essence, find someone that's adept in those markets?
We do hire local staff. So we've got someone, my business partner actually, is based out of Tucson, Arizona in the US. And our team manager, so basically our senior accountant, is based in Manchester in the UK. So we do have local knowledge, but also that's the beauty of bookkeeping. And that was, if I go back to figuring out the business model that I wanted with Images, well, tax is very country specific. Sure. But bookkeeping, which feeds up into international accounting standards, there's differences, but they're a lot more similar than tax law. And so that was where I saw an opportunity to build a global business where if we can just focus on the bookkeeping side of things, and then each of our clients have a local tax accountant, then things like structure and tax, they can have those specialists provide that advice, whereas our processes are very, 80, 85% the same, regardless of what country we're in. And so our team in the Philippines can do that processing for our client, regardless of the country we're in, and then we have the specialist review it with that location or that country specific knowledge. And then of course there's the accountant at the end for end of year taxes and things like that.
Sure. That makes perfect sense. And I think you're exactly, I mean, obviously you know more about this than I do, but I think you're exactly right that the tax structure and the tax rules and regulations would be much more different than just the kind of the basic standard, what the standard, what am I trying to think of?
Like the international accounting standards.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. It's exactly. I mean, something. I don't know. There's some 3-letter acronym or whatever that's kind of the.
There's IFRS, which is what Australia follows, and then there's GAAP, US GAAP.
That's what I was trying to think of. The GAAP. Yeah. General accepted principles or whatever it's called. Exactly. That's what I was trying to think of. Thank you for because I'd have probably woken up at 3 a.m. That's what I was trying to think of. So I like the idea that, you've made this kind of the transition from kind of the corporate side of things and gotten out of the cube, so to speak, and, launched on your own. But one thing about it, I mean, I think and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it may have helped the transition a little bit, is because you virtually stayed in the same industry. So the things you were doing on the corporate side, you could, transfer directly. What about, what has been the biggest difference that you've seen, or have you gone from being an accountant to an entrepreneur, and now you're spending much more time just running the business than doing accounting? Or what are some of the things that you've really, woken up and think, wow, this is so different?
You're right. I actually do. My role and my job title now is CEO. And it's easy to have that title, but not live it out if you're running a service business and your skill set is in that service, and you can get really dragged back into
Sure.
delivery. And when I was running my consulting business, I was the technical expert. So I was involved in every single project, and it was really hands-on, and it's really hard for me to be a business owner because I was
Right.
in service delivery. Whereas bookkeeping was a lot more simple than the kind of more complex consulting I was doing. So it's easier to systemize that and build a team. And
Hmm.
I'll give you an example of what my role looks like now. In April of this year, my partner and I had our first child, and I was able to take a month out of the business, not touch anything. So we had people handling sales coming in, onboarding new clients, delivery, quality assurance, and the team also hired a new full-time bookkeeper, all while I wasn't there, and the business grew. So for me, that's what it means to be a CEO, is to have a team in place that can run the whole business without you. But that took a lot of time and effort. That took 4
Absolutely.
years
Yeah.
to get things to that point, and it took a very intentional effort on my behalf not to be involved in the delivery, which is hard because I can jump in and solve accounting problems. That's my craft. So to stay out of that, it would have been easier to be in that business owner role if I wasn't an accountant. I think if I was thinking of other service business owners, naturally you want to create a service business with your skill set. But if you're trying to be a business owner and build an asset, sometimes it's easier if from day one you have to hire someone or have a business partner that's doing service delivery, so someone can be focused on running the business. But if I look at the market, that's not naturally how it happens. People normally go into consulting with their skill set
Yeah,
first
exactly.
and then have those challenges around scaling.
Right. Right. It's a little bit about the whole premise of the book, The E-Myth, that
Yeah.
you're really good at what you do. But one of these days you're going to have to wake up and start working on your business instead of in it. So I love the lessons I mean, over the number of interviews we've done on the podcast, just how many people have talked about, that transition. And some people have found it very difficult to do because, I mean, they are great technicians. They're great tacticians. They're great at so many different things, but that idea of delegating and taking your hands off and actually, leading the business versus actually working in it has been a really difficult transition for them. Have you found that to be true, or has it been pretty easy, or somewhere in the
I
middle?
found it, I found it hard. It was all my goal from day one. So from the beginning, we're really clear about processes in a team and trying
Hmm.
to get out of all of the different roles apart from leading the business. But on the other side, I'm really proud of my profession. So I suppose some of my professional pride is tied up in doing great accounting work.
Yeah.
And the quality of what I was doing as a consultant, but also the price, 10 times the price of what we're charging for bookkeeping. And so I found that quite difficult to separate my professional reputation from the level of service that you can expect when you're hiring a bookkeeper, when you're not hiring Meryl Johnston, the consultant. And that
Right.
took me quite some time to work through, to understand, well, this is what we're offering as bookkeepers, and we want to be world-class bookkeepers. And that's still very different to hiring Meryl Johnston, the chartered accountant consultant.
Right. Exactly. And I think so. When you went from corporate to the consultancy, was it specifically around like financial management? Was it in account? I mean, was it accountancy, bookkeeping, consultation, that type of thing, or was it more general business consultation?
It was everything. I just was taking any work that I could. So I was doing some bookkeeping. I was doing some big software integration. So I'd go in and act on behalf of the company with the software consultant. So I'd act like the internal project manager. I'd go and help companies prepare for audit. Again, acting as the
Mm,
internal company liaison to the external auditors.
right.
I was doing huge clients to tiny clients. I was just doing anything. So really just to get it off the ground, I hadn't figured out ideal client or anything like that. And I really only thought through that when I was running, or when I moved to B Ninjas. And for me, it was a gradual transition. So I kind of went from doing contracting work through the recruitment business and
Mm-hmm.
then scaling up consulting. And then I kept on doing that consulting just because it paid a high hourly rate compared to trying to build a systemized business like
Right.
B Ninjas. And it was only 18 months into B Ninjas that I fully stopped consulting and went full time in that. So for me, it was just kind of a gradual transition. If I wanted to drop consulting, but I needed that money to pay for living expenses.
Yeah.
And then gradually, B Ninjas had much more scale, but was more cost intensive at the beginning to hire a team and build systems than doing consulting. So it's more scalable, but more expensive. And so I didn't rush into that. I kind of had to gradually transition.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And I mean, I really like the idea of, just I could even hear kind of the struggle that you talked about, kind of the ebb and flow of, I got this, I don't have this, I got this, I don't have this, and just the whole idea of how do you make that transition. And you may have already answered this, but how would you define, as Simon Sinek talks about, finding your why? And I'm really curious about that. Like, what's the thing that gets you out of bed? What gets your heart pumping in the morning? What in those days you just don't want to get up? What's the thing that drives you in essence?
Well, I have an interesting story around this from our business why, because in the early days of B Ninjas, my co-founder and I are really clear about why we wanted to do it. And it was, from my perspective, it was to run a global business and grow it to 7 figures and work less than 20 hours a week. That was kind of what I wanted, so that I could spend more time surfing and traveling, but still have a fun business. And then I realized, well, my team doesn't really care about that. That's a very selfish why. That's just all about me. So that's not really going to excite or inspire a team.
Yeah, come work for me. I don't want to work anymore. So that's exactly. I love that company vision.
So then we did a whole process around bringing the team together, and we're a remote team, so we did it online through a workshop to really define what our mission, vision, and values were all about. And we didn't want to just be pigeonholed into we're doing bookkeeping and we're giving reports. Actually, our purpose, we see it as freedom. And so I wanted that freedom to surf and travel and not work at office hours and work from anywhere in the world. That's what I wanted. But we realized that's what our team want, and that's what our clients are after too. So we're about trying to create that freedom by helping business owners understand their numbers and then make data-driven decisions so that they can have freedom. Not so they can drive a Ferrari. It's more about creating the time so they can step out of their business and be with their family or go surfing. And so that's what gets me out of bed every day, because I'm trying to create that environment for my team and for me and my family, but also we're trying to help all of our clients achieve that. And we think that if we can do that, and our aim is to help 10,000 businesses with that over a period of years, then these business owners and their families are going to be happier as well, that they won't have the financial stress, that they've got more time to take care of their health and do what's important to them. So that's kind of how we're trying to have an impact.
So do you, it may be difficult to answer this question because, just the relatively short runway. I mean, I think I read somewhere where this started in 2015. Is that about the time it started? So over the last, say, 3.5, 4 years, how have you seen retention? So is this a business that tends to churn, people, and there's relatively high turnover, or have you seen, hey, the first 50 clients we have, we still have 48 of them, on the books, so to speak. So what would you say would be your kind of I guess the turnover in essence of clientele?
So I think we're lucky in the industry that we're in, bookkeeping. People stay with their accountant or their bookkeeper for a long time. So it makes the sales cycle longer because it's harder to get people to switch.
Right.
And then clients stay with us. So our churn is under 2% a month.
Wow.
So that gives you an indication of, people, you don't just sign up for a bookkeeper and then move to someone else in 2 months. You normally stay with your bookkeeper for a couple of years.
As long as you're in business. If you're in business, you stay with them. Yeah. So this is another spot that we like to transition in during the chat here. And this is the one where I get to take the headphones and kind of lay them down and get away from the microphone, because I really want to highlight, our guest here, because this is the opportunity that you get to, you've dreamt all your life about being a university professor. So here you go. You get your shot in the spotlight. But I'm really curious, just the whole idea of, what would it be like if you would, go back and start up again tomorrow? What would it look like? What would you do? What are some lessons that you've learned? Maybe two or three things. Here's the three steps I would do tomorrow if I was going to start a business. So just, I think this is really apropos for our listeners, on because many of them, they're probably thinking through this in their minds anyway, about what does it look like to take that leap, so to speak. So walk us through that a little bit. So what would you do, and what would it look like?
So if I was starting again, the first thing I'd want to make sure is my personal finance situation. So I want to have runway. So I want to have savings. So if I don't have savings, then I'd consider staying in my job for a bit longer and maybe
Mm-hmm.
working another year to build up a bank balance. I'd then also be looking at how can I cut my personal expenses, living costs, or talk with my partner about what we can do there. Because when you're growing a business, you don't want to have huge costs and have to pay yourself a big wage in the early days.
Yeah.
Really, you want to be focused on growing your business. So first of all, I'd make sure my personal finances are sorted out and that I've got some runway there so that I don't have too much pressure. Then I'd be following the 7-day startup method or something like that. So how can I get to market really quickly? And the approach that I think is important with entrepreneurship, which comes from Rob Walling's stair-step method, is you don't have to go for the most difficult business model in your first business. So entrepreneurship is like a career. So you might want to build a tech
I
startup.
love that.
It doesn't have to be your first business. It's going to take time to build the skill set as an entrepreneur. In the same way, for me, it took me 10 years to really build my skills as an accountant. I'd pick an easier business model, and that will depend on your skill set and your industry knowledge, your network, as to what an easier business model is. But something like building software is probably not the easiest business model compared to something like services
Right.
originally. And so for me, my first business was consulting. That was really easy to get started, low barriers to entry. And there's a lot of skills you need to learn around sales, proposal writing, dealing with customers, client experience. Maybe you're building an audience. So I'd do that in a lower pressure environment where you're still getting paid, whether that's consulting or some other service business, and then gradually ramp up from there. So for me, Being Ninjas is a product type service business model. So I went from being involved in service delivery to building a team to run a service business for me and build an asset. And then now we're building digital products, which are much more scalable than service. But I didn't jump into that, and I probably couldn't have afforded to do that, and I wouldn't have had the knowledge that I do about our market and their problems, what problems need to be solved 4 years ago. So I've been paid through the service business to understand that market, build an audience, refine our marketing message. So now we're building products. So if I was to recap on that, number one is sort out the personal finance situation.
Mm-hmm.
2 is just get started and launch and follow something like the 7-day startup method where you're getting a customer in the first week. And then 3 is thinking about entrepreneurship as a career and picking an easier business model to build your skills so you can stay in the industry for 10 or 20 years, not pick a hard business model that's going to fail in year 1 and then you have to go back and get a job.
I've been doing this podcast for 2 years. Every week we've launched a new episode, and I think this is the first time that a guest has actually talked about choosing a kind of a low barrier to entry business it eases the transition to that business. It lowers the likelihood of you failing, early. I mean, I really love that philosophy, and with the idea that it's not a static point on a line. It's really a dynamic movie in essence, that, you're kind of this whole idea of entrepreneurship as a career. As you progressed in your previous career, as you progressed in jobs that you've had, this whole idea that as you step into the business world, it's a similar pathway. You just happen to be the boss and you can go surfing in the middle of the afternoon if you want to. So anything else that you wanted to mention about that specific topic, or even anything that you mentioned in that just last roundup or last wrap up there?
I think an attitude or having a growth mindset helps with that. So not assuming that you have all the answers, and you don't have to have all the answers. There's so many things to learn, and just be strategic about what you're learning about. So for myself, I decided that I wanted to learn about storytelling and blog writing, and content marketing is a big part of our marketing strategy now. And as an accountant, I didn't know anything about that, but I consciously made a decision to learn that skill. Whereas something like design and coding, not really my kind of thing. So I decided I need to learn enough to hire the right people for that, so that I've got a well-rounded business or entrepreneurial skill set, but I'm not going to go deep in that.
Right.
But just having that growth mindset of you don't know everything and it's okay, but always continuing to learn and enjoy the process.
Yeah, I mean, it's the idea that kind of stuck in my mind as you were talking is you don't have to know it all, but you have to know enough about
Exactly.
that, about the particular thing that you learn. Just, it's like, what is the accounting method, just in time accounting, you know, you just in time inventory, you know,
Yep.
it has to be there when you need it. And
Yes.
beyond that, you can kind of make the transition. But is there anything that we haven't touched on today that you'd really like to just kind of wrap us up with today? And then I mean, I really appreciate you just taking the time, and I've enjoyed the chat and just hearing your kind of your business transition story and just kind of lessons learned along the way. But is there anything I have not touched on that you want to kind of wrap up with, and then just tell people where the best place to find you online?
I'll share one message around accounting, and a message that this ties into the learning mindset.
Mm-hmm.
I talk to a lot of business owners who feel like they can outsource their accounting and their bookkeeping and just wash their hands of it and take no responsibility. And one of my core messages, and why I really believe in training, is that as the CEO and the business owner, you need to understand enough about accounting and your numbers. The responsibility for knowing your numbers lies with you, even if you're hiring other people to help. And for some reason, it seems like business owners kind of wash their hands of that more than they do the sales or marketing or other elements of their business. And so I really encourage every business owner to put some time into learning a little bit about accounting and going a little bit deeper than you might normally into the numbers for your business, because that's what's going to drive the success of your business. Many businesses fail due to cash flow problems. That's the number one reason in Australia. So actually put the time in and use that growth mindset to learn something about accounting.
All right. I mean, yeah, that's great. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to add my contact details, but you look like you're going to follow on from.
Well, just
from
the
that.
whole idea of just, you know, that I can't remember the exact quote, but it's something like, you know, that which gets monitored is measured. That's what's measured is met, or something like that. So
that's the Peter Drucker code. What gets measured gets done.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what I was trying to try. It was somewhere out there floating around. Same place where the gap accounting principles were that I couldn't put my finger on. So I think it's early stage dementia. I don't know. You know, I'm a grandpa now, so who knows? It could be starting early. So, yeah, tell people where they can find you online.
A couple of places. So there's the Be Ninjas website, which is BEAN ninjas.com, which you can see.
All right, got it right there on the screen.
Yeah. And I'm also quite active on LinkedIn. So anyone's welcome to connect with me there. And that's my name, Meryl Johnston.
All right. We'll make sure that those are in the show notes. And Meryl, thank you so much for just taking the time today. It's early morning in Australia and in the evening on the East Coast of the US, but it's just been a pleasure talking to you and just kind of hearing your business transition story. And just really, I appreciate you sharing just kind of golden nuggets of us, you know, that are further behind you in this process and in growing the business process. But just thank you for really just sharing your wisdom and just helping all boats rise in a rising tide. Meryl, have a great day.
Thanks so much. It's been fun.